Should the digital giants that power our world be broken up? Those calling for such action warn that today's tech giants act like private governments, shaping markets, speech, even politics, while lacking incentives to protect consumers or children online. Historically, they argue splitting monopolies apart has strengthened capitalism, fueled innovation, and protected democracy. But others say keep hands off big tech, that these industries have transformed life for the better just as they are right now, while pulling apart companies would disrupt services, weaken user experience, and let government pick winners and losers. They say markets, not mandates, will check tech power. Open to Debate partners with the SNF Agora Institute at Johns Hopkins University as part of the Hopkins Forum series to bring you this question: tech titans or tyrants? Should the U.S. government break up big tech? This is Open to Debate. I'm John Donvan, and today a debate on whether to break up big tech. We're here at the beautiful Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg Center in front of a live audience at this academic hub, this public square, this incubator of innovation designed to translate groundbreaking research into action. This is our fourth installment of the Hopkins Forum, which is a partnership between Open to Debate and the Stavros Niarchos Foundation SNF Agora Institute at Johns Hopkins to convene leading voices with divergent perspectives to model rigorous, respectful dialogue and disagreement. Now, I would like to welcome to the stage Eugene Scott, a visiting fellow at the SNF Agora Institute and a contributing columnist for the Boston Globe. Welcome, Eugene. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
We're going to talk a little bit about the partnership, and I said I would talk about our mission. Our mission really is to prove that debate has a place in the public discourse, that it's possible to disagree, but not have to hate each other because you disagree. And what we try to model and get across is that people can come with facts and logic, and more importantly than that, a willingness to listen, even a willingness to change their minds, which gets back to that vote. And as I've said, we've been doing this since 2006, and we feel we've had a lot of success. So from your side, about the SNF Agora Institute.
Good evening. My name's Eugene Scott. I'm a journalist, and I'm a visiting fellow at the SNF Agora Institute, which is a center based at the Homewood campus in Baltimore that's modeled after the Agora in ancient Athens that sought to bring together people from various aspects of life and across the political spectrum to flesh out issues and find solutions to many of the ills that are affecting society. So it's not just for students, but it's for professionals and artists and members of the Baltimore community. We do a lot of public events, there are research projects, there's teaching, and we hope really to make debate less of a dirty word. I come from the cable news world, and so I know it's been tainted quite a bit, but the real way you find solutions to many of these issues is through discussion. And so we're trying to figure out ways to help people discuss better.
And when I'm looking, Eugene, at our topic tonight, big tech really intersects with this thing that we're talking about in important ways.
Yes, well, because for better or worse, many of us live in bubbles right now, and the main way in which we're exposed to people and ideas that are different from our own is through social media. And so the reality is we have to figure out how to listen better and to disagree better and to discuss better in ways that don't expand to vision. It's going to be really interesting to see what role big tech plays in that. As someone who's been covering national politics here in D.C. for the last 10 years, quite frankly, it seems like things have often gotten worse.
I was going to ask you how you think it's going.
So there's lots of room for improvement, but I will say I think what people have noticed, people are being very vocal about how we are much more divisive, and being exposed to ideas just for the sake of an idea hasn't actually helped, and so there has to be a different approach. I know we got past Thanksgiving. It seems like everyone is here with no bruises. We want to take that same energy and get through Christmas and the New Year like that as
Which
well.
makes this debate pretty timely.
Always. I mean, tech's not going anywhere. In midterm elections, we're going to see it. The expansion of AI is going to introduce new issues and problems. Hopefully, it'll introduce new solutions as well.
Eugene, thank you very much. And again,
Thanks,
we're so
John.
delighted with this partnership.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the question up for debate, tech titans or tyrants, should the U.S. government break up big tech? By big tech, we're referring to those companies that have come into existence during the lifetimes of most of us in attendance here. companies that have had enormous impact on how we live and function and communicate and connect, for better or for worse. The list includes Google, Meta, Amazon, Microsoft, a lot of others, companies that we interact with daily and also directly. Is their bigness part of why they are so successful? Or is their bigness, on the other hand, something to be very concerned about? And if so, what about breaking them apart? What would be the impact on the consumer, on innovation, on the whole landscape of capitalism? These are the questions we're going to be getting into with four superbly qualified debaters. Please welcome them to the stage now, and let's meet them. So I'm going to start on the side that is arguing that, yes, we should break up big tech. Those are the people on this side of the stage. And I first want to welcome Matt Stoller. Matt is the research director at the American Economic Liberties Project. Matt argues that America is in a, quote, monopoly crisis. And he writes about it in his Substack titled Big. Matt, Politico once called you Washington's angriest progressive. I just want to check. How are you doing today?
I'd like to answer that with a glare.
Joining Matt is Bharat Ramamurti. Bharat was deputy director of the National Economic Council and was an architect of the Biden antitrust agenda. He just started a Substack called The Bully Pulpit. Hi, Bharat. It's great to have you in the program. Teddy Roosevelt used the word bully pulpit, but by bully, he didn't mean somebody beating people up. He meant great, excellent, wonderful. How do you mean it?
Exactly the same way.
Okay, very positive message then. All right. On the other side, arguing, no, we should not break up big tech. I want to welcome first Jennifer Huddleston. Jennifer is a senior fellow in technology policy at the Cato Institute. Your research focuses on law and emerging tech, and you have provided expert testimony before Congress on these topics. Welcome, Jennifer, to the program. It's great to have you. You've also researched and written a fair amount about autonomous vehicles. I know the traffic getting here tonight was terrible, but did you come by autonomous vehicle?
You know, I wish I did. They can't get here to D.C. soon enough, in my opinion.
Yeah, tonight would have been a good starting point for that. Do you think that future is near?
I think so. I think it'll be here very soon.
All right, thanks so much. And your teammate is Geoffrey Manne. Geoffrey is the president and founder of the International Center for Law and Economics, a distinguished fellow at Northwestern and a visiting fellow at IE University in Madrid. Hi, Jeff. Thank you for joining us on the program. In your words, you very briefly worked for the Federal Trade Commission, but today you are arguing against big tech breakups, while at the same time the FTC is suing many of these companies. Do you have friends over at the FTC who are mad at you now for taking the position on this one?
It's probably telling that my 2-week stint at the FTC I describe as being the most successful career the FTC has ever seen.
Well, I'm glad to see you're modest about this, and a little modesty can go far in a debate. So as we get started, a note to our live audience here at Johns Hopkins that you are also playing a critical role. You're being asked to vote on the arguments and to tell us at the end which side you found most persuasive. So that makes this, to some extent, a contest of ideas. And for that, we require something called sportsmanship, where our debaters are here to show that they can disagree with each other, but do so in good faith and not in a way that makes enemies. So we do have rules, which I will enforce if necessary. No personal attacks, keep on topic, listen to what the other side is saying. If we do that, I think we prove our case about true debate and good debate. So let's get to it. We're going to start with a round of opening statements in which each of the debaters in turn takes the floor and tells us why they're making the argument yes or no to our question, should the U.S. government break up big tech? And first, to answer yes to the question, I want to welcome Bharat Ramamurti, once again, former Deputy Director of the President Biden's National Economic Council. The floor is yours.
Thank you. The foundation of American capitalism is competition. Competition between firms is what pushes them to bring prices down. It's what pushes them to offer better products over time. It's what pushes them to innovate, to keep ahead of their competitors. It is the engine of American growth. And it is for that reason that is a tradition of American capitalism that when firms get too big and too powerful, that they're able to stifle competition in their industry, we break them up. There is a proud tradition of this in the United States. We did it in the 1900s with the railroads, when domination over that method of transportation required breaking up those firms, which ended up reducing costs for both consumers and businesses. We did it with Standard Oil in the 1910s, when one giant company was broken up into 34 individual companies that competed against each other, ended up bringing down energy costs for consumers and businesses. We did it with Hollywood in the 1940s. It used to be that the major studios would own movie theaters, and the movie theaters would only show that studio's movies. By breaking that linkage apart, we opened the door for independent theaters and really paved the way for the golden age of Hollywood that followed. And of course, we did it in the 1980s with AT&T, breaking up AT&T into 7 different entities that would compete with one another and opened the door again to competition on things like long-distance calling and ultimately mobile telephone networks. So what I suspect we're going to hear from the other side tonight is that breaking up firms is some radical, dangerous act. And I would argue instead that it is in fact core to American capitalism. It is essential to the proper functioning of how our markets work. So that brings us to big tech. Big tech in many ways exhibits features of all of the types of firms that I just talked about. Like the oil companies, they control a valuable resource, information and data. Like AT&T, they control the way that we communicate with each other. Like Hollywood, they control what we see and what we hear. And they combine all of this into one giant set of firms. So I'm going to preview some of the economic arguments for why breaking up big tech would be important. My partner Matt is going to get into some of the other ones, including some of the political considerations. Number one, big tech domination ends up reducing consumer choice. So let me give you an example of Amazon. Amazon controls about 40% of e-commerce in the United States. If you're a small business, you've got to be on Amazon if you want to sell. But what Amazon also does is sell its own products. And so what Amazon is able to do as a platform is collect information about the types of products that sellers sell on its platform, and then copy those products, and then and sell them on their platform, and make sure that when you search for a product, the Amazon product is at the top of the list, and the competitive product is on page 4, and nobody ever sees it. So it really reduces the amount of choices that consumers have available to them. You see the same thing with Google Search, and you see the same thing with Apple and the App Store that it runs. Number 2, it ends up stifling innovation. We have seen over the last 20 years that the big tech firms strategically acquire any potential competitors. They've made over 1,000 acquisitions in the last 20 years. And that's leading to a substantial reduction in investment in firms because investors don't think that they can get a big return on their investment. Investment in areas where big tech firms operate has gone down 50% recently. And so the Apples and Googles and Amazons of the future never emerge. Third, they control these vital avenues of vital infrastructure elements, like the railroads. Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, control about 60% of cloud computing. We just recently had an outing on AWS, which disrupted banking, the airlines, and so on. We have these vulnerabilities because of this level of concentration. And finally, costs. And you might say, well, I go on Facebook for free, I use Google Search for free, but behind the scenes, whether it's on ad revenue, whether it's on the App Store and the fees that Apple charges, it's raising costs for businesses, which end up feeding through to consumers. So I'd end quickly with this.
Bharat, I'm sorry, I have to cut you off.
Okay, I will end quickly with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Thanks. Next here to make an argument and to try to convince you that we should not break up big tech, I want to welcome to the floor Jennifer Huddleston. Jennifer, your 4 minutes starts now.
Thank you. The American approach to antitrust and competition policy has been based on the consumer welfare standard, which means when we're thinking about this question, the first thing we should ask ourselves is what would breaking up big tech mean for the American consumer? And the American consumer means those of you in the audience tonight who are end users of these products. And it also means the consumers, the small businesses and the competitors who have used these products to further their innovation, to further their reach, and to connect with you as consumers in ways they couldn't have before. So what does a breakup mean for the average American consumer? Well, we know a bit of what that might mean if we look at how European antitrust policy has played out. It means the elimination of certain features that consumers have come to expect. It means that Google map, when you go to do a Google search, is no longer at the top of the page. It means a chilling impact on launching new products. And it means that some of the lower reduced prices, the easier distribution options that are available for developers in the App Store, or for those small businesses who may be using Amazon to reach consumers when they couldn't get on the shelves in Walmart, might be eliminated. And it also may mean in some cases that you might lose that flag that a product is going to ship in 2 days because of Amazon Prime, or those Amazon essential dress shirts that are often popular with some of my male colleagues in DC as being high quality and low prices. But there's also an important history lesson here. When it comes to competition, innovation is often our best competition policy. And we aren't good at predicting where the disruption is going to come through. If we'd been having this debate 20 years ago, we would have been talking about, is MySpace a natural monopoly? How Yahoo had won the search wars. In fact, the second line of that article says, some may say they're the next AOL. Think about now what it means when you see a company referred to as the next AOL. At least for me, when I see it in the context of news, it's usually talking about questions of falling productivity, layoffs, things like that. These giants seem unstoppable until something new and disruptive comes our way. And we're living in one of those moments, one of those eras right now with AI. We aren't talking about the same products we were just 3 years ago. And it's not because we're just seeing the same competitors, it's because we're seeing new ways of thinking about technology, things that we couldn't predict. And what we know is that oftentimes regulators' crystal balls are broken. They don't know how that market's going to evolve or when it's going to evolve. And not only are these companies competing against each other, they're also being forced to innovate, to keep up as the market changes and emerge. And we as consumers are benefiting from that, from the new products, from the new ideas that we could have never dreamed of. And a vibrant tech ecosystem involves players of all sizes. We can't reduce this debate to a big is bad and a small is good mindset. Because the reality is that for our tech ecosystem to function, we're going to need mergers and acquisitions. We're going to need small players and large players. It can't be as simple as one or the other. And we continue to see this playing out in the US. VC investment is still booming. We're seeing particularly in the AI sector, but much more broadly. Innovators are having different exit strategies. In some cases, that may be to get acquired by a large company. And in other cases, it may be to be that next giant that IPOs, that challenges, that changes how we think about things. In some cases, having large scale and being able to invest in research and design, to invest in things like quantum and data centers and AI models is critical to having that infrastructure for the new innovation. And in other cases, it's that small innovator who serves an underserved niche that is able to really change an individual's life in a way they couldn't have imagined. So when you're thinking about this debate, don't think just what does this mean for these tech companies? Think what does a breakup mean for the American consumer?
Thank you, Jennifer. Next up to argue that we should break up big tech, I want to welcome Matt Stoller. Matt, the floor is yours.
Oh, stop it. Okay, so when people ask this question, should the US government break up big tech, what they're really asking is big tech too powerful? And there's a lot of ways to understand power. There are a lot of different types of power. But I want to start with an image that stuck with a lot of Americans in January. And it was Donald Trump in the inauguration in the Capitol Rotunda. At the time, inaugurations are usually done outside, but it was really cold. And he chose to do it inside. And so a lot of his supporters were literally out in the cold, but he did it in a place with just a few supporters, which included Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, founder of Amazon, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg. That image stuck with a lot of Americans because it spoke to the fusion of these enormously powerful corporations with state power itself. And it's not just a partisan thing. Conservatives were very concerned about the Biden administration using these big tech platforms to deplatform conservatives and Donald Trump himself. So it's this fusion of power that the politicians can see, that the American people can see, and that's what we should be worried about. So these companies are all different, but they're all gatekeepers to bottleneck resources. And the consolidation of ad money, and I'm going to talk about this one harm, which I think is really important. The consolidation of the advertising business means that 2,000 out of 3,000 American counties now have no local newspaper. Okay? When an algorithm changes on Meta or Google, 10,000 businesses cry out in the night. These are companies that can change elections. This is too much power. So I'm going to go through three basic problems. So the first is these companies are corrupting American commerce. And we see this, they're all facing antitrust suits. Some of them have been found liable for illegal monopolization. And the story is common. They're great companies. They do a lot of innovation. They invest in products. But then they become monopolies. And they spend their time actually making things worse. So, for example, Google pays $20 billion a year to Apple to make sure that Apple can't show any other search engine, just making the internet worse. And that's true across the board. You can see that's what monopolies do. They defend their position from innovators and from new technology. In the stock market, about 35% of the market is the Mag 7. And so you have the Mag 7, you have the big tech companies, and you have everyone else. And the reason we have that split is not because these companies are creating great stuff. It's because everybody's profit, everyone in the economy's profit is now Google and Facebook and Amazon and Meta's margin. They have keystone infrastructure everybody's got to pay. The second problem is political. 84% of Americans think that social media companies wield too much power. 60% of low-income Americans think that generative AI is going to be bad for them. And there are obvious reasons. So last week or a couple weeks ago, Meta was found by Reuters, 10% of their revenue is coming from advertising for scam products or illegal products. They were also alleged, credibly in a lawsuit, to have been heavily involved in sex trafficking. And there are so many of these scandals, and we just shrug. We just say, there's nothing we can do. There is a deep corrosive loss of faith in the American system because these companies are lawless. The final problem is these companies are creating systemic risk for our national sovereignty. So over the past 18 months, they've mutated from monopolies to a macroeconomic driver of growth. We put all our eggs in the AI data center basket. Without that, we're in recession. That is a dangerous strategy. And I can tell you historically, monopolies look great until they don't. Think of Boeing. Think of Intel. Think of General Motors in the 60s or US Steel. We see with DeepSeek and Chinese models that our monopolies might look great, but somehow there might be internal operational deficiencies that we don't see.
Matt, I have to jump in on you.
Oh,
thank you very much. You hit time.
Thank you.
And next, speaking lastly in the opening round, I want to welcome to the front of the stage Geoffrey Manne, who is arguing against breaking up big tech. Geoffrey, the floor is yours.
Thanks, John. As you just heard, our opponents cloak tonight's resolution in the mantle of democracy. But make no mistake, what they're proposing is to replace the rule of law with the rule of whim. Matt and Bharat will tell you a story about power. They'll say these companies are private governments that must be dismantled. Theirs is a moral crusade, not an economic argument. But what do we get if we break up these companies? Not because they've harmed consumers, but because someone deems them to be too big or too political. We're handing the government a loaded gun with no safety, converting antitrust from a legal discipline based on evidence into a political weapon based on grievance. That doesn't protect democracy. It allows unelected bureaucrats to pick winners and losers based on idiosyncratic, often aesthetic preferences. And instead of what? As Jennifer noted, for 50 years now, American antitrust has been guided by the consumer welfare standard. It asks one objective question: does this conduct harm consumers? Under this standard, our actual antitrust law, the case for breaking up big tech collapses. Consider prices. Digital services are a deflationary force. Search is free, maps are free, two-day shipping has revolutionized logistics. The price of complaining about big tech on big tech platforms, also zero. How about innovation? These so-called monopolies spend $200 billion a year on R&D. They're in a death match with each other, over AI, cloud computing, at constant risk of being displaced by new technology, and they spend endlessly to improve their products to stave off that threat. Now, the courts have agreed. In case after case, judges are roundly rejecting these arguments. Because when you actually have to prove harm with evidence, the arguments fail. Even in the Google search case, while Judge Mehta found that some of Google's conduct was problematic, he also found that Google succeeded primarily because it offered a better product. When confronted with the remedy at issue tonight, a breakup, he determined that there was simply no basis for it at all. Our opponents essentially promise a world without downsides, where you can break up the phone in your pocket and somehow it still works just as well, it costs just as little, and it offers just as much security. But as the great economist Thomas Sowell reminds us, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. So tonight, as they propose a breakup, ask yourself, what's the trade-off? If you break Google search into pieces, you trade away the quality of integrated search results and the economic engine that funds Chrome and Android. If you break up Amazon, you trade away the efficiency that lowers prices for working families and provides a platform that has generated millions of small businesses and allowed them to exist when they wouldn't have otherwise. Their case relies on pretending these trade-offs don't exist or simply aren't that important. Not only that, you couldn't devise a more problematic and expensive way than breaking up firms to regulate whatever you think might actually be the problems with big tech. The history of antitrust breakups, while it's true there have been breakup remedies applied in US antitrust history, the history is abysmal. And that's before you add in the complexities of big tech. What does it even mean to break up big tech? These aren't traditional industrial firms where you could take a couple of factories out here and remove a warehouse over there, and the firm still operates in basically the same way it did before. The breakup our opponents envision is aimed at punishing, at eviscerating, not at addressing specific concerns. If you're worried about privacy, pass a privacy law. California did it, and it has 3 of the GAFAM firms in its home state. If you're worried about content moderation, pass transparency rules. But don't blow up the engine of American economy because you don't like Mark Zuckerberg's vibes. It's the policy equivalent of burning down your house because you don't like the paint color. This notion, finally, that economic power leads to political power, simply not supported by the data. In the end, we shouldn't trade the temporary, contestable dominance of a few big tech firms for the permanent, arbitrary dominance of the state. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. And that concludes our opening round. Now we move on to round 2, and in round 2, it's less formal. The debaters have a conversation that's moderated by me. In a little while, we'll be going to our audience here at Johns Hopkins for questions, but I just want to summarize what I think I heard. I heard the side that's arguing, yes, we should break up big tech, Bharat Ramamurti and Matt Stoller, argue that there's a long history of companies, when they get too big, being broken up by the US government, that it's basically become the American way of capitalism. That the reason for doing that is when companies become too big, they can control too much. That reduces consumer choice. It stifles innovation by competitors. They also make a strong argument about the political risk of too much power concentrated in the hands of a small number of companies. They say that monopolies will defend their position no matter what, and that they represent a systemic risk to democracy. The team arguing, no, we should not break up big tech, Geoffrey, Manne, and Jennifer Huddleston, what I heard them make the argument is that they want to focus on the standard that has been used for the last 50 years in antitrust law, the consumer welfare standard, which says fundamentally that the decision rests on whether the company is hurting or helping the consumer's interests. And again, they're talking about prices, they're talking about innovation. They say that in the case of Europe, where there has been more antitrust action against tech companies than here, that it has resulted in the loss of features that have come at the expense of consumer interests. And they also have a concern about the government itself having a decision, a hand in making these decisions about these companies, primarily because they say the future is unpredictable. It's not really clear at what point a company is going to be disrupted by, even however big is going to be disrupted by something else that comes down the pike, and you really can't pinpoint that. They accuse their opponents of being on a moral crusade. Are you on a moral crusade?
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
So are they.
Oh, there we go.
Economics is a form of moral reform. If you say we need a society based on efficiency, that's a moral statement. I just happen to think that we should have a society based on freedom from arbitrary coercion as our lodestar. So it's just two different visions of morality.
But when they make the case that the standard that should be used is whether it's good or bad for the consumer, from the consumer as consumer, not as citizen, but as consumer, access to the product, access to good price products, access to products that are going to change over time and get better and compete into better products, that's the standard, that the political part, the moral part doesn't come into it.
Well,
Bharat?
Okay. Look,
it's surprising to me to hear the claim that some of these products have been rapidly improving over time. Does anybody here think that Google search is better today than it was 10 years ago? It's largely, the quality of the results that you get, in my experience, have been far worse. Does anybody think that the Facebook newsfeed is better now than it was 10 years ago? Why is it that these companies still have dominant positions in those markets? It's because they're able to exercise monopoly power and retain control over them. And I want to respond to the claim that this is going to lead to horrible outcomes for consumers. I mean, somebody has to explain to me why saying to Amazon that the part of your company that sells products on your platform should be a separate company than the platform itself.
All right, so we have two people who are going to answer that very response to you. So let's take it to Geoffrey or Jennifer.
I just respond to one thing really. Does anyone use the Facebook newsfeed? Especially anyone under the age of 50? No.
Because that was actually
that's important.
That was what I was going to pick up on as well. We're talking about a very specific feature of a very specific platform, and the nature of search is changing, whether it's the emergence of products like ChatGPT or the way that many young people go to video forward search. They're going to platforms like TikTok or YouTube to do search. Same thing with social media. The nature of the social media platforms have changed. Yes, some people are still going to Facebook newsfeed, but a lot of people are going to other social media platforms, whether it's X or whether it's decentralized platforms like Discord or other platforms. These are incredibly competitive markets, and that we are seeing the nature of what it means to do search or social media change. If we're only looking for the next Facebook, we might miss what's actually going on in the market.
Well, I think if you talk to any publisher or newspaper or somebody who, anyone, and I don't just mean a sort of a traditional newspaper, but somebody who produces content for a living, they will tell you they have to ride Google's rails to market, right? This is the same thing as we've had with railroads. It's the same thing that we've had in every other aspect of American society. You have, I believe it was a publisher a few years ago who said that they all operate on Mark Zuckerberg's plantation, right? And that is true. Like, that is what is going on. There are a few railroads, or there are a few roads to market, and these guys control them. Now, we had a discussion about, should we break these companies up? And somehow it got cabined to this question of antitrust. There's lots of ways to break these companies up. We've done it in lots of ways. But the basic idea is that if someone has enormous power over what goes into our children's brains, that's something we should be very concerned about.
Just to bring to the other side, are you saying that you're rejecting the notion that the consumer welfare standard should be the basis on which these decisions are made? I just want a yes or no before we bring it to the other side.
Well, I reject their way of characterizing consumer welfare standard. The consumer welfare standard is a very specific way of talking about price theory.
Which I think you're defending, right? You're defending that use of that standard.
It's certainly the standard in antitrust. I'd love to hear about what the other ways of breaking up these companies are that are consistent with the Constitution. I mean, it really drives home the point to me that the reason we're talking about antitrust is because antitrust is a well-developed body of law that does have some relationship. It has a history of applying a remedy that does sometimes entail breaking up companies. But it has a massive apparatus that you have to, hoops that you have to jump through before we let the government do that. If the argument is, well, it's not even that we want antitrust to do this, which I think would be problematic enough, but we want, I don't know, Congress to just come along and
let me ask Bharat if that is your position. It's not just antitrust is not going to be the only mechanism by which we do what you think needs to be done.
Of course. I mean, look, we live in a democracy. We should be able to choose the rules of the economy that we all live in. And I think, frankly, how will consumers benefit? How do we break this up? A very simple way of thinking about it is, what would the world look like if instead of WhatsApp and Instagram living under Facebook, we had them as separate companies? Is that a terrible world for consumers, or is it actually a good world? If you think about the fact that WhatsApp emerged as a competitor to Facebook and Facebook Messenger as an option that had better privacy for people who wanted to communicate with each other. It was snapped up by Facebook. Facebook took the data off of WhatsApp, and now that option, that pro-privacy option, doesn't really exist for consumers. What's so bad about the world in which those are separate companies?
That pro-privacy option absolutely exists. Not only does it exist in WhatsApp, and because Facebook bought WhatsApp, it's available
I just feel he asked a pretty good question. I'm respecting where you wanted to go with this, but he kind of said, what's wrong with the world in which those things are separate from each other?
Well,
and Jennifer
so I think one of the things we have to say is that we don't know what that world looks like, because you're basically asking to unwind teams that have been working together on products. You're asking to separate products that have been integrated in ways that consumers have come to expect. We don't know what WhatsApp would have become if it wasn't acquired by Meta, and whether or not that would have been a true competitor or whether it would have been something that failed. These business deals, particularly around Instagram and WhatsApp, were not sure things at the time that they were done, and it's hard to separate what would have happened from what actually happened. And in a separate world, I think some of the concerns we often hear raised about privacy or content moderation, we don't know that those separate platforms would behave any differently when they're trying to reach a general audience. And in fact, in privacy with something like WhatsApp, it might be more difficult to offer a privacy sensitive option, because you would have to be able to ensure that you could maintain the upkeep of the platform. You might have to engage in more advertising or charge your users more, because you wouldn't be able to rely on kind of the integration into this larger company.
Matt, your response to that?
Yeah, I mean, look, we know that when CEOs have to focus on rivals, they focus on rivals. And when they don't have rivals, they focus on government. And I think that's really...
What do you mean by that?
They focus on what we've shown is, we have some data that shows that when a industry becomes more consolidated, lobbying spending goes up dramatically. Because what monopolies do is they focus on defending their monopoly. They focus on getting concessions from government instead of focusing on trying to beat their rival.
Can you pause a second? Do you disagree with that assessment? I want to let him finish his point, but...
Very much so. I mean, not only do I think that is the data incorrect, but I think you probably have the direction of causation wrong, Matt.
Okay, I just wanted to, you can continue your thought. You're talking about that they want to focus on government, lobbying, et cetera, as opposed to their rivals. And that's a bad thing, you're saying.
I found your point so compelling. So I just...
Can I add one thing on
Sure,
that?
yeah.
You guys said, let's just pass a privacy bill. I spent 7 years working in the Senate, spent 3 years working in the White House. Throughout that entire time, we tried to pass a bipartisan comprehensive privacy bill. And we couldn't do it, despite strong support from within Congress, strong support from the public. And why couldn't we do it? Is because extraordinarily powerful tech firms are able to use a variety of political tools, not just lobbying, not just campaign spending, but soft and other hard power, to basically stop the types of privacy protections that we, collectively, the American people, want to impose. So my main argument about breaking up these firms isn't necessarily political, but we should be clear-eyed that the political impact that they have as one giant firm, as opposed to several different firms, is significant. And final point, if, let's say, WhatsApp was a different company than Facebook and it had really strong privacy protections, in that world, maybe WhatsApp is lobbying for privacy protections and Facebook is lobbying against them, and you have more of a fair fight. By consolidating all of it under one umbrella, that's how you get the concentrated lobbying power that makes it harder to pass some of these regulations.
Okay. Jeff, you let me interrupt your interruption, so I'm going to come back to you. You were disagreeing with your opponent in terms of the notion that these companies end up, when they don't have rivals, they end up focusing on manipulating the government.
Yeah.
Fundamentally.
It's just factually incorrect in the sense that they spend dramatically more money on research and development, on building new products, on improving their products. I mean, by orders of magnitude beyond what they spend on lobbying. Maybe they don't face a competitor that looks just like them, but their markets are so contestable and the risk of a technology coming along and displacing them is so substantial that they act as if they are in a perfectly competitive market, spending money to constantly improve their products, to forestall the next thing that's going to come along, to not be the next MySpace. Now, at the same time, the money they spend on lobbying is a pittance compared to what they spend on R&D. And there is no correlation between the size of a company and the effectiveness of its lobbying. I mean, if that were true, Michael Bloomberg would be president. If that were true, the NRA wouldn't be more powerful than big tech, even though it spends a fraction of what big tech does. The reality is that those lobbyists are, that the quality of lobbying is not directly proportionate to the size of your company, because the amount of money you have to spend on lobbying to get something done is so small that virtually any company that's bigger than 50 people can spend all it needs to influence Congress. It's a couple $1 million a year. It's crazy. In fact, there's a name for this, by the way. It's called the Tulloch paradox. A great economist who said, it's amazing that we spend so little on
Jennifer, I want to address something again from the opening statements. You made the argument that breaking up big tech will stifle innovation. Your opponents made the argument that not breaking up big tech will stifle innovation. Can you explain your case in a little bit more detail, and then I want to hear the opponent's explanation of their position on the innovation question.
It's going to depend on which particular type of innovation we're talking about, how this might actually play out. One of the questions is, of course, while large tech companies are fighting these antitrust cases, what aren't they doing? What might we be missing out on right now that we won't know for decades down the road? Either because there's a chilling effect where the attorneys are telling them, hey, don't go into that new line of business. We already have the government on our back. Or there's just limited resources. Even at the largest companies, there's only so many resources, so many man hours, so much money. And we know in some ways that this happens. We have seen this with statements after the Microsoft case, where Bill Gates has mentioned that part of why Microsoft was late to mobile was because their time and attention was dedicated towards the antitrust battle, not towards developing mobile in that critical moment. Additionally, there are certain elements that require large-scale investments where we're going to need big companies to be able to have those large R&D budgets to be able to build the next innovations in areas like quantum and AI. And it's great that we have players at all levels of the stack involved in that. But if you break up a company, you may disperse those resources in ways where we're not able to be the global leader or be globally competitive when it comes to some of these really cutting-edge technologies.
Okay, so you heard your opponent's case for innovation being stifled by breaking up the big companies. How do you respond in terms of your argument that not breaking them up stifles innovation?
Well, it's interesting that you brought up the Microsoft case. I think if you look at the details of that case were essentially that Microsoft wanted to use its power with the Windows operating system, which was dominant, to tie it to Internet Explorer, to make that the exclusive way of accessing the internet. And that antitrust action basically blocked them from doing that for a series of years. That is exactly the period of time when these new big tech firms emerged. And they probably would not have emerged if everything was funneled through a single Microsoft-controlled product. So that was actually a perfect example of how antitrust action and stopping consolidation can lead to more innovation. And to go back to what I said in my opening statement, the data is really clear that if you believe, as I do, that venture capital is an important lifeblood of American innovation, it's one of the key reasons why we're in better standing than Europe, is because we have a much more active VC system. You look at the data, there's a huge reduction in VC investment into areas where there is a dominant firm, because they recognize that there's not really an opportunity for those small firms to bust out and become life-changing, bet the bank firms, the types of things that VCs are looking for. So I think there's unquestionably an anti-innovation effect from this type of dominance and control.
About 100 years ago or so, the progressive movement became successful in passing antitrust legislation, and a lot of what was behind that was a political wind, in which the general public was beginning to resent the extreme wealth of people like Rockefeller and Carnegie, and they were able to pass it. And my question is, do you feel that political wind blowing now, especially in light of what your opponents are saying about their fear of people like Bezos and Zuckerberg?
I guess it's possible, but I think we can all see what the consequence of that is today and what the consequence would be if we remove the economic and legal constraints of antitrust from the government's ability to act on that. It would be what Donald Trump is doing. I think that you can see Trump undertaking a lot of actions on behalf of his friends. And I don't think you see, a great core of economic sense at the root of much of what he's doing. And I think that's what you would see in this case. Now, I don't think that's a better world. I do think that Trump, in some of those actions, sees himself as affecting a populist sort of program. But I don't think we're better off in a world in which the executive, or even worse, unelected bureaucrats at the FTC or DOJ are the ones who are able to make those decisions unfettered by the courts or by economics.
Jennifer, looks like you want to add something.
I want to add that when we're talking about antitrust precedents, we have to recognize that whatever happens with these tech companies in these antitrust cases, it won't just stay in the tech sector. This could dramatically change antitrust throughout the American economy in many other sectors as well, unless we're talking about what should be considered unconstitutional elements, where we're talking about those kind of bill of attainder for the government to come in and break up this specific specific company, which should be a completely different set of concerns from what we've, as if we want to get into that discussion as well. But that needs to be something that's considered. At the end of the day, this isn't just about tech. This is about what role can the government have in the American economy overall.
Again, going back to, I want to go to this side, again, going back to the beginning of the last century when the antitrust movement was really beginning to be on a roll. We saw the railroads broken up. We saw Standard Oil broken up into a bunch of little companies that now actually are Chevron and Exxon Mobil, which merged again. What did we learn from that experience? Was that breaking up, an unmitigated good?
Well, I just tell a quick story about innovation, because what we see historically is whenever you break a company up, there's a lot of great ideas that come out. And we saw that with Standard Oil. So Indiana Standard Oil was a subsidiary, and they had this new process to crack oil to make this thing called gasoline. But they kept going to New York, Standard Oil, saying, can we do this? And they were like, no, you can't. We sell kerosene. We're a kerosene company. They split up the companies. They started to crack gasoline. Everyone was like, oh, that seems useful. And then they licensed it to everyone, and there we go, gasoline. And that's what you see over and over and over. Microsoft gets blocked from killing its competitors, and you get Google, and you get Facebook. IBM and AT&T in the 1970s, they go after them with antitrust cases. You get Microsoft, you get Intel. You go back historically. It's always like this. It's the monopolists defend themselves, and they defend themselves by preventing the new inflection point, new companies from emerging. And that's really what antitrust, that's really what we're talking about is let's let the little guy compete, because that's where the good ideas come from.
In a moment, we're going to go to, I'll let that happen. I'm sorry I keep stepping on your applause. In a moment, we're going to go to questions. So if you have a question, come on down to the microphone over on the that side of the auditorium. But I just want to ask this side to respond to what you just heard.
Yeah, can I just respond to the sort of general point about innovation? We must be looking at different literature. I mean, so what I find most amazing is that right now, almost anyone I think that you ask would tell you that innovation today is in substantial part being financed by these big tech companies. And they're not financing it to somehow suppress innovations by others. They are the reason that we have innovation going on in AI and in a lot of other places. And AI will do more than anything else, I think, to undermine their dominance in a lot of markets. These companies are responsible for massive amounts of investment, not just their own in their own companies, but in other companies as well. The amount of money in venture capital today, I don't know. I've never heard this statistic that it's less than it used to be. It's massively more than it's ever been. And the fact that maybe there isn't quite as much of it going into, say, search, because Google's got that locked up. I don't see why that's a bad thing. It's exactly what Matt was just saying. We want that money to go into these other areas like AI and other things to invent the next thing that's going to take down search. We don't need more money invested in making another search engine better than Google. They've already done a pretty good job.
All right, I'm going to go to audience questions now. And by the way, if anybody in line is a Hopkins student, the first Hopkins student to get in line gets to jump to the front.
Oh.
It's just a special. Well, you're in the front already. Do you mind telling us your name?
Sure, yeah. My name is Natalie Bernstein. I'm an undergraduate at the Homewood campus, majoring in psychology and political science. My question is, there's been references a few times throughout the debate to potential alternative legislation, maybe around data privacy or transparency. And I was wondering if this might be an area of agreement, or if people could maybe explicate what an alternative to breaking up the tech companies might look like and how it might protect consumers.
So we touched on it a little bit, but let's go a little more detail and then let your opponent say that no, they totally don't agree with that, because I think that's what we're going to hear.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if there is agreement that we need much stronger data privacy laws, that we should have more transparency into the algorithms that some of these companies use. But it goes back to my original point, and again, I think I'm the only one on this stage who has significant experience both in the executive branch and in the Congress on this. You are running into a brick wall when it comes to trying to pass these types of legislation. And it's because of the incredible power of the incumbents and their ability to block it. And I would love it if I could snap my fingers and pass this legislation tomorrow. It feels to me at this point that breaking up the political power, setting aside all the economic reasons, breaking up the political power of these firms is a necessary step to achieve that type of regulation, at least with the type of ferocity that it deserves.
So I think when it comes to data privacy, there's a robust debate on data privacy, and I think there is general agreement on the need for a federal data privacy standard. I think part of the problem is where we would probably start disagreeing is what that federal data privacy standard should look like. And that's where this debate often stalls out, because one of the concerns with any type of regulation is if you lock in regulation that only the large players can comply with, you actually may make concentration and innovation worse. You may make it more difficult for those small players to be able to compete with large players if they have the additional burdens of regulation. And then for some of these other issues, there are other concerns that come into play as well. So when we're, for example, talking about online speech or content moderation, if we're talking about changing the law there, there's of course going to be First Amendment concerns and what this means for free expression. But I do think perhaps where there may be some agreement is that we want to make sure that when we're debating a policy, when we're debating what tool to use, that we're debating the right tool for the right policy issue and not just trying to make something a Swiss Army knife, or as Jeff alluded to earlier, to burn down the house because we don't like the paint colors.
Can I respond to
Sure.
one thing? The notion that it's the big tech companies lobbying that is preventing, a federal privacy law from being enacted seems to me to fly in the face of reality. It's either one of the strongest indictments of the democratic process I've ever heard, or it is just incorrect in the sense that there are lots of reasons why there are there is opposition to privacy, to any specific privacy rule. And unless you think that companies are inexorably in opposition to consumers, and I know that some people do, I happen not to think that's correct. I think we're actually better off having their position being reflected in Congress and in these debates in Congress. But the fact that nothing is getting passed, that's not a function of big tech getting in the way. They just don't have that much power.
Thank you for your question.
Can I make a brief point?
Yeah, sure, please.
I just, one thing is that when you put forward a regulation and you're dealing with a monopoly, the monopoly tends to capture the regulation for its own benefit. And when you put forward a regulation and there's a competitive market, that is less likely to happen.
Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Lindy, but I'm actually asking a question on behalf of someone watching from the Homewood campus. And so the question is, how do we determine the boundary between legitimate civic engagement by major tech corporations and the troubling consolidation of power that occurs when they financially align themselves with political leaders?
So it sounds like that's more of a challenge to your side, so I'll let you go first on that one.
I think it's the opposite, actually. I think the reality is that you don't know the difference, and that in a sense, the whole notion of opposition to tech companies, or for that matter to any kind of companies participating in the democratic process, is born out of a kind of a sort of unsupported sort of moral opposition to those companies. And because in reality, you actually do want them to participate. And in reality, they just don't have enough power relative to other companies to monopolize the political process. It just doesn't cost that much. So any firm can buy a politician. It costs like $1 million. You don't have to be Google to have $1 million to spend to buy a politician. So I think the reality is that we don't know exactly where that line falls, and the best answer is allow the debate to flourish, allow democracy to happen.
Well, can I jump in on that one as a response?
Yeah.
I think we have a First Amendment, so we're not going to stifle the ability of anybody to speak. But that makes it all the more important that we regulate the economic and political power of these large institutions based on their size. I think it was Brandeis who said we can either have concentrated power in few hands or a democracy, but we can't have both. And I think part of the reason for that is, as I said, in my experience, when you had a regulatory decision, a legislative push, and you had a number of big firms, but some of them were on one side and some were on the other, you had a fighting chance of getting something done. But when they're all on one side, it becomes extraordinarily hard to get anything done. So for people out there who care about protecting privacy, to go to your rhetorical question earlier, I'll answer it. I think it is an indictment of democracy that we haven't been able to think about the litany of abuses that these big tech firms have inflicted upon kids, selling third-party data, allowing exploitation of children, et cetera, one after another. And what have we actually done to rein in that behavior going forward? Think about it. Think about the outrage that has time and time again, almost on a yearly basis. And then what have we actually done to rein in that behavior? Think about that discrepancy, and then think about what's driving that discrepancy.
Next question.
Hi, I'm Bob LaRosa. I graduated Hopkins in 1973. So my question has to do with the DuPont company, and it was broken up. It was a good thing for the company. It was a good thing for the state of Delaware, and it was a good thing for America. Why do you think that that's not the case for what you could call big tech?
So that's a challenge to decide.
Well, it's to both sides.
Well, they do think it's a good thing.
Yes, but
Okay.
sure.
I support the question.
Thank you.
I can tell you that the literature shows that there's literature by Bob Crandall and Ken Elzinga that looks at every single remedy that's been imposed by the antitrust laws in the nature of a breakup, and looks at what's happened to those industries subsequently in terms of prices, in terms of entry, in terms of innovation and the like. And there are one or two sort of quasi exceptions, but for the most part, none of them accomplished what the regulators, in most cases the DOJ, wanted or intended to accomplish as a consequence of the breakup. They just didn't. Now, it doesn't mean that once in a while you can't have, the economy is pretty resilient. Even after you've done this, they've managed to accomplish some good things. But on average, more than on average, almost unanimously, they haven't been useful.
Specifically, the breakup of the DuPont company separated General Motors and DuPont.
I'm not particularly familiar with it, but I don't know why that necessarily would have been better than the alternative. Of course, we don't know what the alternative would have looked like.
Okay, I'm going to stop on that question and move on to the next question. I'm just curious, something that's I've been thinking about throughout this is the fact that we're talking about algorithms and AI and this kind of unpredictable world. Does that in any way raise more for you the concerns that your opponents are talking about?
I guess not particularly, in the sense that I don't know why we should think that those devices are only going to be used in the service of evil instead of good, I suppose. So the very same tool that might facilitate collusion will also facilitate the detection of collusion. And in fact, antitrust agencies around the world are kind of rapidly adopting a lot of these new technologies in order to sort of improve their enforcement mechanism. There are other answers too, but I think that's the main one, is I don't know why we think these have to be bad.
Well, I just want to point something out, which is that companies do incredibly stupid mergers all the time, and Wall Street breaks companies up all the time, and the world doesn't collapse, and it's basically fine. The idea that we can't tell the future and so regulators should never do anything. I mean, CEOs can't tell the future, and they do stupid things all the time. You have to have some moral principles guiding what you do. And our moral principle is that consolidation of too much power is dangerous. And there are going to be some mistakes. We have checks and balances in our political system, but we've decided that those are the mistakes we're willing to tolerate because too much consolidated power is dangerous. And I just am not hearing any answer on the other side to that problem.
Do you really think that there's no difference between... Do you really think that there's no difference between the majority shareholders of a company breaking up a company and the government doing it? Because I think there's a massive difference, both in terms of the likelihood of it being correct, not that it's always going to be correct when the shareholders do it, but also in terms of the moral implications.
Okay,
we have 5 minutes left for questions, and I'd like to get into some more. I'm probably only going to be able to do 2 more questions.
Hi, my name is Sarah. It's sort of going down the same road. I wonder if the no side has some historical examples where breaking up a company was detrimental to the consumer.
I do. Do you have,
Go ahead.
Can you do it in 30 seconds?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think a good one is, it was mentioned, I think, in one of the opening statements, the breaking up of the studios, the movie studios. That was a vertical breakup. That was making the studios and the theaters, the distribution network, separating them. Every study that's looked at that has found that that prices went up, a number of films went down, the quality of films went down. There was nothing positive for consumers as a result of that. I mean, literally nothing on any of the dimensions that we would have cared about. The only dimension on which it did anything arguably positive is if you take the approach of my opponents and you assume that there's a moral good to making the companies smaller, but it didn't actually help consumers.
Thank you for your question. That was a very good concrete example for us. One more question, maybe 2 more questions, we'll see.
I'm Gabriel. I'm a sociologist at SNF Agora and UCLA. And Mr. Stoller's opening statement mentioned tech CEOs at the Trump inauguration. So I'm wondering if it increases or decreases the politicization of large media companies that the Trump administration will get to decide whether Trump's friends at Paramount Skydance or his enemies at Netflix get to buy Warner Brothers Discovery.
So this is, I'd actually like to take this question because, you've heard a lot of statements about, antitrust, you just get anybody to lawless bureaucrats, blah, blah, blah. There's a process for antitrust cases. You have to go to court and you have to get a judge to say yes or no on a merger. You have to get a court to say this is a monopoly or not. It doesn't just happen. You can't just snap your fingers. And there have been a lot of big tech companies that have been found liable for monopolization. The other thing is you have multiple enforcement layers. You have the federal government can enforce, but so can state governments. So with Paramount in that deal, it's possible for the California State Attorney General to bring a case. It's actually possible for private individuals to bring cases. This is an argument for decentralization of power because it actually is pretty hard to be an authoritarian in America because we have this system of decentralized power set up both politically and commercially. But the more you allow for this consolidation, the more you allow for things like, fire this guy or fire that guy because I don't like what he's saying or doing. And so I think we need to be very aware that it is the consolidated nature of our media system that has allowed for this kind of dangerous autocratic behavior. And we have to preserve decentralization where we can.
I'm going to have one more question. Are you a student?
Yeah.
So you get to ask the last question.
Oh, okay.
Can you tell us who you are, please? Thanks.
Hi, my name is Aarti, and I am a master's in biotechnology student. And in today's debate, there was no mention of something for biotech. So I would like to ask this question that the big tech, like Microsoft, is investing a lot in bioinformatics, and breaking up a big tech, how would it affect biotech companies and the R&D behind it? And what are your thoughts about it?
Look, I think that there isn't very compelling evidence and even a theoretical argument that I can see that forcing these companies apart would somehow lead to a net reduction in investment. I don't deny that these companies currently are putting a lot of money into that. But if you separate them into 2 or 3 companies who are now competing against each other for these potential lines of business, let's say these 3 companies are suddenly competing to be the leader in using AI for biotech purposes and achieving medical breakthroughs. Are we in a better position, and will we have a net increase in investment if you have 4 companies competing for the same goal relative to 1 company? We have seen time and again, there's empirical data on this, that when you have consolidation in a market, there's a reduction in investment, in part because that monopolist does not feel as much competitive pressure to innovate. They already have they're protecting what they already have, and they don't feel like they need to go out and get it. I think we would, in my mind, unquestionably be in a better position if we had more competitors trying to break through with biotech innovation, breakthrough with applying AI in the medical fields, and I, for one, would welcome that.
If I can just respond, I think we need to grapple with the reality of what breaking up a company actually means, because it's not just 3 companies that all go about their merry way. There's usually decades of government oversight on how these companies can interact with each other. With a technology like biotech, you may mean literally breaking up teams, which can be incredibly important for things like biotech research. It may mean that 2 companies can't talk to each other about important biotech ideas, where the AI team saw this and the biotech team saw this, and now they can have that cross conversation.
You mean legally they would be barred from it?
There could at times be
years.
Legal separation between what information these companies could share with each other to try and prevent reconcentration or prevent this kind of reemergence. And so I think we do have to this isn't just 3 completely separate independent companies all doing the same thing as company A used to do. These are very strictly enforced legal separations that could mean that those teams, those individuals, those products don't have that cross interactivity anymore.
If I may, I'd actually like to refer to something that Jennifer said in her opening statement that's very relevant to this. She said that that what we need in most markets is companies of lots of different sizes. That's almost no more true anywhere than in biotech and pharmaceutical industries, where you need big companies that are undertaking the massive risk of the research, and other companies that may have an expertise in getting through the massive regulatory process, and other companies that are doing other types of research on, that can't easily be funded by the same sources as the others. And you actually have this ecosystem that has lots of companies of lots of different sizes, and they all have sort of different capabilities. If you just assume that every company is essentially identical, and it doesn't matter if it's company A or company B doing tasks 1 and 2, I think it's a dramatic oversimplification, and it's just not actually how the economy works.
Okay, I'm going to call it a wrap on questions unless you have one last thought on that. You're good. Okay, so that is a wrap on our questions. I want to thank the audience for your questions. So now we move on to our closing round, and in our closing round, each of our debaters takes the floor once again to make a closing statement, to make their final case to you. They get 90 seconds for these closings. Matt Stoller is up first. He is arguing that the U.S. government should break up big tech. Matt,
do you want me up there?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I want to start by going back to the question of power. And I want to read you a quote from a businessman telling something to the Wall Street Journal in 2019. "The government will hit me with a fine, but if Google suspends my listings, I'm out of a job. Google could make me homeless." That's power. Remember, we're talking about power. So in the 1930s, FDR talked about the main challenge facing America, what he called the quote-unquote informal economic government of the United States. These were 5 basically financial holding companies: Rockefellers, Morgans, DuPonts, Mellons, etc. And that's basically the situation that we're in today. And I want to bring back to this moment of COVID, which I think really crystallizes it. This is a time when people were trying to figure out how we do contact tracing. And every government in the world was begging Google and Apple to change their privacy settings. And they negotiated or said no. But that is too much power, that they get a say over public health decisions in an emergency. We see this with Facebook and elections, Facebook and ethnic conflict all over the world. These are wonderful technologies that we have. We have a supercomputer and a camera in all of our pockets, and yet they have turned them into a digital leash. Now,
Matt, you have 10 seconds, I'm afraid.
I just want to remember, we have a tradition in this country of liberty and freedom, and all we have to do is remember it.
Thank you. Jennifer, you are up. I'm sorry. Yes, you are. Jennifer, you're up next. And you are, again, to remind everyone, you're arguing that the government should not break up big tech.
Well, and I'm actually going to start with where Matt ended. I'm going to agree with Matt that we in this country have a tradition of liberty and freedom. And that's what this debate is actually about. Who gets to decide what products you have? Who gets to decide when a company is too big? Should it be you as the consumer that chooses a product, that chooses a service because it's the service that best serves you? Or should it be the government deciding that a company has become de facto too big, that it's become a bad monopoly because of what the government decides, not because it's shown consumer harm, but because of some subjective reason that the particular government doesn't like that company? And then think about what that power means, not only for our leading tech companies who are driving innovation, who are the reason that so many of us have new ways to connect with friends and family, have new ways to start businesses, have new ways to express ourselves creatively that a generation ago we couldn't have imagined. But instead, that the government gets to decide who's big, who's bad, who's little, who's small, by some arbitrary subjective measure based on the political whims of the government. That won't just stay in the tech sector. That could impact every element of the economy. These precedents could change things not only for today's leading technology companies, but for many other areas of business, and could set a chilling effect that ultimately makes the government the one to decide what products we have rather than the American consumer.
Thank you, Jennifer. Next up, Bharat Ramamurti. Bharat, your closing statement, please. You are arguing to break up big tech.
To the last point that was made, that it should only be consumer-driven, we've seen throughout the course of this debate and historically that there comes a time when the concentration of power means that the consumer doesn't really have that choice anymore. And it's up to the government and up to us as citizens to decide together that we need to make this change. And we've talked about several historical examples and seen several examples of how it's led to better outcomes for consumers, more innovation, and has really powered the type of growth that we've had in the United States. I'll leave you with this. When I spent time in government, we would often have to make decisions under uncertainty. There's very few times that you are going to be certain. I imagine a lot of you are uncertain about the question before us today. So in those moments, I always try to think, given uncertainty, what is the pathway that's going to do the best to mitigate potential risks and maximize potential benefits? And if you look back 20 years from now, and let's say we haven't broken up these firms, what are the risks that we are facing? We are facing the risk that they will continue to exercise more and more economic power over the most intimate, personal details and aspects of our lives, the things that we see, the things that we hear, the ways we talk to each other, the way we communicate with each other, the interactions and the transactions that we have each day. That the political power now, especially with the rise of artificial intelligence, will then translate into direct control over this powerful new technology, which could transform the way that we work and that we live. Is that the world that we want to live in? Or do we want to abide by our historical tradition and break down these firms and see what kind of an innovation emerges from that?
Thank you. Geoffrey, Manne, you get the last word. Your 90 seconds begins now.
All right. I also worked in the government for 2 weeks, remember. I get very nervous when I hear statements like that last one about how one's view of the world suggests that it's really awful and it is in need of government to fix it. The main problem with that is that my view of the world isn't the same, and most of our views aren't the same as everyone else's. The notion that we're looking at some evil and sort of horrible dystopia brought about by these big tech companies is simply not consistent with reality. I think that my opponents believe that they can brush the costs of breaking up big tech sort of under the rug and pretend like you won't destroy all of what's great about big tech companies, and as Jennifer points out, whatever companies come next after big tech, that you won't destroy what's great in order to achieve an aesthetic preference for a world that looks like they want it to look. Small businesses, mom and pop stores on Main Street. That's not the world that I want to live in. I want to live in the world where my phone has everything on it that I want, that I'm able to go to one place and I'm certain that it's secure, and I'm certain that all of the apps I want are there and that they function perfectly well together. I want to be able to buy what I want on Amazon and know that it's going to be delivered in a day. And my concern is that the benefits that they think we'll get by breaking up big tech are a small fraction of the cost that we'll bear if we do so.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So that is a wrap on the argumentation part of the program, and now we want to ask you to go to your phones again and look at that code and tell us once again whether you would be yes, no, or undecided on the question of whether the government should break up big tech.
Do we get to vote?
Sorry?
Do we get to vote?
It would be a wash, I think.
I think it'd be a wash.
I would hope.
I think that's right.
I want to ask our debaters to come forward while that's happening. Because I also want to point out that what I saw demonstrated in this debate is the thing that we try to aim for, which is two teams that disagree with each other quite sharply, nevertheless listening to one another and addressing one another with respect and also with logic and facts. And you made it a pleasure to listen to all of you. I also want to thank all of our questioners as well. But I always like to encourage a handshake among the debaters at the end.
Thanks so much. That was fun. That was great job.
Everyone who knows Matt Stoller from Twitter thinks that he's the angriest man in the world, but when you meet him in person, you realize that he's just a sweet pussycat.
Yeah, I'm curious as we wait for the results of the poll. What did you learned that about Matt?
No, I knew that already.
Oh, okay. But did either of you hear anything from the other side that you actually thought that was well argued, that was an impressive point, that's something I need to think about? Because I think that's going on with our audience as well. And if there's nothing...
Only after the voting is done will I answer that question.
Yeah. No, I think the voting is locked out. Everybody's making eye contact with us again, so we're just waiting for that to come up. But did you hear anything from the other side that surprised you, or did you anticipate everything that was going to come from your opponents?
I'll tell you one thing that I didn't hear that I was preparing for, which is a common argument that you hear, which is we will lose our competitive edge versus China. There's a race to the top. We're engaged in this international competition, and if our big tech firms aren't the ones out there leading the way, that we'll lose ground to Chinese tech firms that don't share our values, and so on. And so I was more surprised that didn't come up. I had really good answers to that, but still.
I was waiting to get this. You tend to hear that from the conservatives, from the Republicans, right. Many of whom actually are in many ways very much aligned with the other side. But you do that tends to be a argument that comes from a place that I don't come from. And neither does Jennifer.
Jennifer, how did you made such a strong case for the consumer welfare standard, and your opponents acknowledge that it's part of the story, but not the whole story.
Yeah, I think it's an important conversation to have. I was actually going to comment on, I think there are further conversations for Bharat and I to have about data privacy at some point, that seems to be another issue area where perhaps we could have some fruitful conversation.
I think one thing I was surprised at and learned is just how easy it is to buy a congressman and how we all should do it. You have like pricing lists and like you had different options. I was impressed, and yeah.
You should see what economists do with that.
I'll throw in a $5 and control.
No, it's
Senate.
very inexpensive.
Yeah.
I mean, that's for a senator, congressman.
So what I'm doing,
everything is going up in price except Congress. I guess it's like,
well, because you can't do it. They can't do anything. So what's the point? What are you paying for?
Yeah.
All right, I see the voting results approaching us, and I want to say something that I really mean. We don't see this as really about winners and losers, because the whole point is for you to have heard all sides. Sometimes maybe you heard something you haven't heard before. So however this vote of persuasion went, you all got across to somebody somewhere, and I really mean that. Nevertheless, here are the results. On the question, should the U.S. government break up big tech, before the vote, 47.9% said yes, 30.9% said no, 21.2% said undecided. After the vote, 51.6% said yes, 39% said no, 9% were undecided. In terms of percentage point swings, the no side pulled up a little bit more than the yes side. So theoretically, in theory, you were more persuasive, and congratulations to you. But congratulations to all of you for being on the stage. I want to thank you and our audience and everybody who asked a thoughtful question, and also a huge thanks to Eugene Scott and the Hopkins Bloomberg Center for hosting us, and the SNF Agora Institute team who made this happen through our partnership. Thank you all for coming out and being open to debate. I'm John Donvan. We'll see you next time.